A single Native American could carry enough water for their entire family across hundreds of miles without a single metal container, plastic bottle, or ceramic pot. They turned living organisms into perfect water vessels using a method so brilliant it sounds like science fiction. But there's one material they used that seems completely impossible. Long before anyone thought about turning on a faucet or grabbing a plastic bottle from the fridge, Native Americans had mastered the art of finding and using water wherever they lived. Rivers became their highways and their lifelines. Springs bubbled up like nature's own water fountains, perfectly positioned for daily visits. Lakes stretched out like massive storage tanks, always ready to provide what families needed. The simplest method? Just cup your hands and drink. No fancy equipment required. Your palms made a decent temporary bowl, though they leaked like crazy if you weren't quick about it. Some folks used large shells instead, nature's first drinking cups. These worked especially well near coastal areas where shells were everywhere, just waiting to be picked up and put to work. Then there were the creative types who figured out that certain leaves could do the job too. Picture this. You're thirsty, but you're nowhere near a shell-covered beach. What do? Grab a big sturdy leaf and fold it into a makeshift scoop. Worked like a charm for getting a quick drink, though don't expect it to last very long. But here's where things get interesting. Not everyone lived next to a babbling brook or a crystal-clear lake. Some tribes found themselves in areas where water was scarce or the nearest reliable source was miles away. Walking back and forth with cupped hands wasn't exactly practical when you needed enough water for cooking, cleaning, and drinking for an entire family. These water-scarce regions forced people to get creative fast. You can't survive very long making multiple trips per day to a distant water source, especially when you've got other important tasks like hunting, gathering food, or taking care of children. Something had to give. The human brain is pretty amazing when survival is on the line. These early Americans started looking around at their environment with fresh eyes, asking themselves a crucial question. What materials could actually hold water and travel well? The answer would revolutionize how they lived, traveled, and thrived in challenging landscapes. What they discovered next changed everything about portable water storage. The solution was growing right around them, flexible enough to carry, but strong enough to last. It required skill, patience, and knowledge passed down through generations. But once mastered, it opened up entirely new possibilities for where tribes could live and how far they could roam. Life gets tougher when the nearest river sits 20 miles away and your settlement can't just pack up and move. Native Americans in arid regions faced this reality daily. They couldn't rely on cupped hands or convenient streams like their cousins near abundant water sources. The solution? Basketry became their lifeline. These weren't your grandmother's decorative baskets sitting on kitchen counters. We're talking about serious engineering here. Willow branches, sumac fibers, and other flexible plant materials got twisted and woven into containers that could actually hold water without turning into soggy messes within minutes. The weaving technique made all the difference. Tight, precise twining created walls dense enough to trap water molecules. Think of it like nature's version of waterproof fabric, except it took incredible skill to pull off correctly. One loose weave meant losing precious water drop by drop during long journeys across desert terrain. But here's where it gets clever. These water baskets weren't just functional cylinders. Many resembled gourds or jugs with narrow necks and wide bodies. The shape wasn't accidental. It prevented sloshing and reduced spillage when people walked over uneven ground or climbed rocky paths. Smart basket makers discovered another game-changing trick. Adding clay or pine pitch to the interior surfaces created an extra waterproof barrier. The clay would dry and harden, sealing tiny gaps between fibers that might otherwise leak. Pine pitch worked similarly, creating a natural resin coating that kept water securely contained. Different regions developed their own signature styles based on available materials. Desert communities might use yucca fibers, while forest dwellers preferred oak splints or birch bark strips. The basic principle remained constant, though. Tight weaving plus smart design equals reliable water storage. These baskets served multiple purposes beyond simple transport. Larger ones stayed at camp for communal water storage, while smaller versions traveled with hunting parties or trading expeditions. Some families owned several sizes, almost like having a complete dinnerware set but for water management. The durability impressed everyone who used them properly. A well-made water basket could last years with regular maintenance and careful handling. Compare that to modern plastic bottles that crack, leak, or break after minimal use. What's fascinating is how this basketry knowledge passed down through generations via hands-on teaching. No written instructions existed, just experienced weavers guiding younger hands through the intricate process of creating watertight containers from wild plant materials. Of course, baskets weren't the only solution floating around. Nature provided other ingenious options that required zero weaving skills whatsoever. Native Americans quickly realized that one size definitely didn't fit all when it came to water baskets. The genius lay in creating different designs for different jobs, and boy, did they get creative with their solutions. Some of these water baskets were absolute giants, holding up to 5 gallons of water. That's roughly the same amount as those heavy plastic buckets you see at hardware stores today. But here's the kicker. These massive baskets weighed practically nothing when empty. The weaving techniques were so refined that even a child could carry the container itself without breaking a sweat. Most water baskets, though, were built for the long haul. Think marathon, not sprint. Travelers needed containers that could bounce along rough terrain for days without falling apart or spilling their precious cargo. The answer? Lightweight but incredibly tough designs that could handle whatever nature threw at them. Then there's the brilliant engineering of narrow openings. While it might seem logical to make wide-mouth containers for easy filling, Native Americans figured out that skinny necks dramatically reduced water loss during travel. Less sloshing meant more water actually reaching its destination. Makes sense, right? But wait, the real stroke of genius was the pointed bottom design. These weren't your typical flat-bottom containers. The pointy bottoms allowed baskets to rest at angles without completely dumping their contents. Lean one against a rock or tree, and the water stays put instead of creating an unwanted flood. Basket styles weren't set in stone either. Different generations tweaked designs based on what worked and what didn't. Maybe the handles needed adjusting for longer trips. Perhaps the opening required a different angle for easier pouring. Each improvement got passed down and refined further. The flexibility of these baskets was remarkable too. Unlike rigid containers, woven baskets could flex slightly with movement, reducing stress on the weaving and preventing catastrophic failures. They bent but didn't break, literally. Regional variations also played a huge role in shaping these containers. Desert tribes needed different features than forest dwellers. Mountain communities had different requirements than plains people. Each environment demanded its own solutions, leading to an amazing variety of specialized water basket designs across different tribes. Well, baskets weren't the only game in town for water storage. Native Americans had discovered something even more ingenious growing right in their gardens: natural containers that required zero weaving skills but offered incredible portability for water transport. Native Americans discovered that nature had already created the perfect water bottle. Gourds grew wild in many regions, and once they dried out, they became lightweight, watertight containers that put modern plastic bottles to shame. The process was surprisingly simple but required patience. After harvesting mature gourds, people would clean out all the seeds and pulp, then let them dry completely. This could take weeks, but the wait was worth it. A properly dried gourd became incredibly durable and naturally waterproof. But here's where it gets clever. These weren't just random containers. Different gourd varieties served different purposes. Small bottle gourds worked perfectly as personal canteens, while larger ones could hold enough water for an entire family. The natural shape made them easy to grip, and their rounded bottoms prevented them from rolling away when set down. The real genius came in the details. People would cut small openings at the top and create natural stoppers using wooden plugs, corn cobs, or even bunched grass. Some tribes got fancy and carved decorative patterns into the surface, turning practical items into works of art. Makes sense, right? If you're carrying something every day, it might as well look good. Then there's the temperature control aspect that nobody talks about. Gourd walls are thick enough to keep water surprisingly cool, even on hot summer days. The natural insulation worked better than many containers available today. Native Americans had figured out thermal regulation without any modern technology. Portability was another major advantage. Unlike heavy clay pots or bulky baskets, gourds were light enough for long-distance travel. Many people created simple carrying systems using leather straps or woven cords, allowing them to sling their water supply over their shoulder or attach it to their belt. Different regions developed their own gourd traditions. Some tribes preferred larger containers for base camps, while nomadic groups favored smaller, more portable versions. The weird part is how perfectly suited gourds were for this purpose, almost like nature designed them specifically for water storage. Families often maintained multiple gourds of various sizes, creating their own water storage system. One person might carry a small personal canteen while keeping larger gourds back at camp for cooking and general use. Maintenance was straightforward too. A quick rinse and occasional drying kept gourds functional for months or even years. When one finally cracked or wore out, replacement was as simple as finding another mature gourd and starting the drying process again. While gourds solved many water storage problems, certain environments lacked these plants entirely. This limitation pushed some communities toward completely different materials, ones that grew tall and hollow in wetland areas. River cane sounds fancy, but it's basically nature's version of a water bottle that grows wild near streams and rivers. Native Americans figured out they could cut sections of this hollow plant, clean it out, and suddenly have a lightweight canteen that didn't require any weaving or fancy pottery skills. The process was surprisingly simple. Cut a piece of river cane between two joints, and you've got yourself a natural tube with built-in end caps. Well, sort of. The joints created natural barriers, but you still needed to plug the ends properly. A bit of clay, some tree sap, or even a carefully carved wooden stopper would do the trick. Makes sense, right? These cane canteens were absolute game changers for hunters and travelers. Unlike heavy clay pots or bulky baskets, river cane containers were light enough to carry without breaking your back. Some pieces of cane grew thick enough to hold a decent amount of water, we're talking 2 to 3 inches wide in some areas. That might not sound huge, but when you're trekking through the wilderness, every ounce of water matters. The weird part is how perfectly designed these natural containers were for quick access. Need a drink? Pop off one end, take a sip, plug it back up. No complicated openings or awkward pouring required. River cane even had natural flexibility, so it wouldn't shatter if you accidentally dropped it on a rock. But here's the catch. River cane only grew in certain regions. You needed to live near rivers, streams, or wetlands where this plant thrived naturally. If your territory didn't have river cane, you were out of luck with this particular water storage method. Then there's the seasonal aspect. The best time to harvest river cane was when it reached full maturity, but before it became too brittle. Let's not forget that these containers required some preparation time. The cane had to be properly dried to prevent rot, cleaned thoroughly to remove any plant residue, and tested to make sure your plugs actually worked. Nobody wanted to discover their water container leaked halfway through a 3-day hunting trip. Different tribes developed their own techniques for preparing and sealing river cane canteens. Some preferred certain types of stoppers, while others had specific ways of treating the interior walls to prevent any weird plant taste from affecting the water. What's fascinating is how this simple solution worked alongside other water storage methods, creating a complete system that covered different needs and situations. When plant materials weren't available or just didn't cut it, Native Americans turned to something that might make modern hikers a bit squeamish. Animal skins and bladders became their go-to water containers. And honestly, these worked incredibly well. Buffalo, deer, elk, and even smaller animals provided the raw materials for some seriously effective water storage. The process wasn't exactly simple, though. First, hunters had to carefully remove the hide without puncturing it. Then came the tedious work of scraping away all the fat and flesh. Makes sense, right? Nobody wants their drinking water tasting like yesterday's hunt. But here's where it gets really clever. The internal organs, particularly bladders and stomachs, were absolute goldmines for water storage. These natural sacs were already designed to hold liquid, so they made perfect sense as portable containers. Native Americans would clean them thoroughly, sometimes turning them inside out multiple times to remove any unwanted flavors or odors. The real genius came in the preparation methods. Some tribes would smoke the bladders lightly to preserve them and add a subtle flavor. Others preferred salt curing or simple air drying. These treated bladders could hold anywhere from 1 to 3 gallons of water, depending on the animal size. A buffalo stomach pouch could easily carry enough water for several people on a long journey. Then, there's the flexibility factor that no basket or gourd could match. Animal skin water bags could squeeze into tight spaces, conform to a traveler's back, or even be worn around the waist. When empty, they folded up to almost nothing. Try doing that with a clay pot. Sealing these containers required some creativity too. Leather strips, wooden plugs, or even carved bone stoppers kept the water secure. Some tribes developed intricate knots that could be tied and untied quickly, but held tight during transport. The weird part is how waterproof these containers actually were when properly prepared. A well-made skin water bag could last for months without leaking. Different regions developed their own techniques based on available animals. Plains tribes mastered buffalo hide containers, while forest dwellers became experts with deer bladders. Coastal groups sometimes used seal skins, which were naturally more water-resistant. Well, these animal-based containers solved water transport problems in areas where suitable plants simply didn't grow. But what happened when Native Americans wanted something more permanent? Something that could sit in one place and store large amounts of water for entire communities? That's where clay started changing everything about water storage completely. While baskets leaked and gourds cracked, some clever tribes figured out something revolutionary. They discovered that mud could become magic if you knew how to treat it right. Clay pottery wasn't just about making pretty bowls for the village, it was about creating water containers that could outlast everything else. The process started simple enough. Women would gather clay from riverbanks, usually the sticky stuff that made your feet sink. But here's where it gets interesting. They learned to mix in crushed shells, sand, or even old pottery pieces to make the clay stronger. Smart thinking, right? Pure clay cracks when it dries, but add some texture and suddenly you've got something that holds together. Shaping these water jugs took real skill. The walls had to be thick enough to prevent breaking, but thin enough to keep them from weighing as much as a boulder. Most pottery water containers held about 2 to 4 gallons, which sounds reasonable until you remember that water weighs 8 pounds per gallon. Do the math, and you're looking at 16 to 32 pounds when full. Then came the firing process. This wasn't just tossing clay pots into a campfire and hoping for the best. Tribes built special firing pits or used carefully controlled fires that burned at just the right temperature. Too hot and everything exploded. Too cool and the clay stayed soft and useless. Getting this balance right took generations of trial and error. But wait, the really clever part was the decoration. Those intricate patterns weren't just for show. Each design often identified which family made the pot or which tribe it belonged to. Some markings even indicated what the container was meant to hold. Water jugs had different patterns than storage pots for corn or beans. The weird part is that pottery didn't replace the older methods entirely. Even tribes that mastered clay work kept making baskets and using gourds. Makes sense when you think about it. Pottery might last longer, but it also weighs more and breaks if you drop it on rocks. Baskets bounce, gourds roll. Clay containers worked best for settlements where people stayed put for months at a time. You could bury them partially in the ground to keep water cool, or arrange several pots around your dwelling for different purposes. One for drinking water, another for cooking, maybe a third for ceremonial uses. Still, carrying pottery on long journeys meant serious planning, which brings us to an interesting question. What happened when tribes needed to combine all these different container types for maximum efficiency? Here's where Native American water ingenuity really starts to shine. These weren't just random containers scattered around. People developed entire systems that would make modern emergency preppers jealous. Smart tribes never put all their water in one basket, literally. They'd use multiple container types strategically. Heavy clay pots stayed put near the main camp for long-term storage. Lightweight gourds got tucked into travel packs. Flexible skin bags worked perfectly for hunting trips where every ounce mattered. Why risk everything on one container type when nature gave you so many options? The really clever part was location planning. Water containers weren't just stored anywhere. They were positioned like a chess game across settlements. Some got buried in cool spots to keep water fresh longer. Others hung from tree branches in shaded areas. A few always stayed near cooking fires for quick access. Makes sense, right? But here's something most people never think about. Carrying 20 gallons of water by hand would break your back faster than you could say dehydration. Native Americans solved this with wooden frame systems that distributed weight across shoulders and hips. These weren't just rough branches tied together. They were carefully crafted, carrying devices that let one person transport what would normally take 3 or 4 people. Then, there's the flavor game. Water wasn't always just plain water. Different container types work better for different additives. Clay vessels were perfect for storing water mixed with crushed mint leaves. Gourds held berry-flavored water without absorbing weird tastes. Baskets lined with pitch could handle pine needle tea that might damage other containers. And the weird part is how creative they got with emergency collection. When regular sources dried up, people would lay out absorbent plant fibers overnight to collect dew, then wring them out into whatever containers they had handy. Rainstorms became opportunities to funnel water into multiple vessels using improvised leaf channels and bark gutters. Some tribes even developed rotation systems where containers got cleaned and refilled on schedules. Nothing worse than reaching for your emergency water supply only to find it's turned into some nasty science experiment. These weren't just survival tricks, they were sophisticated water management systems that kept entire communities hydrated through droughts, migrations, and seasonal changes. Multiple backups, strategic placement, specialized carrying gear, and creative collection methods all working together. The techniques developed over thousands of years created a foundation that would influence water storage and transport methods long after European contact changed everything forever.